This conference will now be recorded.
I'd like to call the January 23rd, 2023 special council meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. Any additions to the agenda or corrections? If not, would anyone like to make a motion to accept the agenda for this evening?
I make a motion to accept the agenda as written.
So moved. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councilor Wagner. Would you call the roll, please, Stephanie?
Mayor Hobart,
Aye.
Councilor Wagner,
Aye.
Councilor Normand,
Aye.
Councilor Webb,
Aye.
motion carried.
Okay. With no further ado, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Joanna. Did I pronounce that correct?
You did, Johanna.
Joanna, good. So welcome tonight. And you want to introduce yourself once again, and I'll let you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor and councilors and community. I appreciate you having me here tonight. My name is Johanna Costa. I work at Oregon Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Unit. And I was contacted by a community member, who asked me to visit a few months ago. And thank you so much for welcoming me to a second meeting tonight. I wanted to talk a little bit about Oregon DOJ's statewide bias response hotline and share a little bit about what we do and certainly offer our resources and services to anyone in the community who needs to report bias or hate. So Oregon was actually the first state in the nation to pass hate crime laws back in 1981. Oregon modeled its laws off of the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL's model legislature, which proposed laws based on what was happening in the 80s, typically multiple co-defendants involved in neo-Nazi skinhead gangs, targeting typically folks either in the LGBTQ community or religious minorities or community members who were people of color with assaults. So multiple co-defendants targeting one person. And for many years after 1981, those laws stayed the same. But in 2019, the legislature passed Senate Bill 577. And this happened after a series of community events where the Attorney General toured the state with a task force of folks trying to find out what was needed in updating our hate crime laws. Unfortunately, Oregon has seen several very high profile cases, including the murder of an individual named Larnell Bruce Jr., as well as the murders that occurred on the MAX trains in Portland. And the Attorney General heard from folks that there was an uptick in hate and bias around the state, both criminal conduct as well as what are called bias incidents. And as a result, heard from the community and put forward this series of legislation called Senate Bill 577. And this was a series of 17 changes to existing laws that touched on defining bias incidents and redefining bias crimes, that gave law enforcement more responsibility to respond when a bias incident is reported, that created a statewide hotline for folks to call and receive support, and that required transparency of data so that the legislature and our elected officials had a better idea of what was happening in the state. So first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about the protected classes under Senate Bill 577. So I mentioned back in the 80s, we had a smaller group of protected classes that expanded in 2019, specifically to add gender identity as a distinct protected class. In 2012, disability had been added as a protected class, and so now we have 7 protected classes under this Oregon law: race, color, religion, gender identity and sexual orientation, disability, and national origin. So if someone is targeted based in whole or in part by a perception of that protected class, then that could be a bias crime or a bias incident in Oregon. And a lot of times when we talk about protected classes, and specifically when we talk about hate crimes, we think of this as an issue about race. And rightfully so. Most hate crime and most bias incidents are race-based. And within race, most hate crimes and most bias incidents are anti-Black or African-American bias. And yet, we have 7 protected classes. And on the hotline and nationally, we receive reports about targeting based on all of the protected classes, as well as an intersectionality of those protected classes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about protected classes and representation in Oregon. 26% of Oregonians identify as having a disability. That's 1 in 4 folks. 1 in 4 people identifies as having a disability in this state. In Oregon, you might not be surprised to know that we have one of the highest percentages of folks who identify as not having a religion, which is part of a protected class in Oregon. Atheism is part of religion. We have 1% of folks identify as Muslim and 2% as Jewish. In terms of national origin, about 10% of folks who live in Oregon were born outside of the United States, and 15% of folks who live in Oregon don't speak English at home. And you can see the breakdown of what languages most folks speak at home. And yet 95% of those folks are US citizens. And so this common phrase that we hear reported to the hotline, go back to your country, is actually, this is my country. In terms of sexual orientation, about 5 to 8% of adults identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer, or any other number of positive affirmations and affinities in the LGBTQ plus identity. And as we go younger folks in Oregon, that number goes up. More teens identify as LGBTQ plus. So about between 8 and 15% of 17-year-olds identify as sexual minorities. In terms of gender identity, 27,000 people in this state identify as transgender, whether non-binary or not linked to the gender they were assigned at birth. In terms of race, about 2% of Oregonians are Black or African American. Oregon has a very high percentage of American Indian or Alaska Native individuals. In fact, the city of Portland is the 9th highest Native Indian population in the country for a city. We have about 5% of folks who identify as Asian, about 0.5% of folks as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. Our Latinx population is about 13%, and folks who identify as 2 or more races, about 4%. And again, about 25% of Oregonians identify as people of color. So it's a very diverse state. So we're not just talking just about race. So one of the changes in Senate Bill 577 is that Oregon created a term called a bias. And there's no other state in the nation that has this term. A bias incident is defined by the legislature as a hostile expression of animus targeting someone based on their perceived protected class. So we're talking about hate speech. We're talking about offensive jokes, and I use quotations around that word because these are not jokes, haha. They're intended to degrade or dehumanize or make someone feel like they don't belong. Hostility, discrimination, flying a flag on one's property, tending to intimidate someone. Again, any type of slur or epithet, we have heard them all on the hotline. When there is no criminal element, and yet we're talking about a hostile expression of animus, then we're talking about a bias incident. A person need not identify as a member of that protected class to be targeted with a bias incident. So an example that we saw a lot during COVID was we would get a lot of reports of anti-China bias. So someone would be targeted with some type of anti-China sentiment, and yet the person would say, well, I'm Native Hawaiian, or, I'm from the Philippines, or, some other, I'm not Chinese. So this misidentification, the person need not belong to that protected class that's targeted. And yet it's sort of another layer of harm that occurs, that misidentity. I don't care about quote unquote you people, whatever you are, it's other, it's not, it doesn't belong. So bias incident can be incredibly harmful. On the hotline, we receive reports from folks who call and report a bias incident that happened that day. And we've received reports of bias incidents that happened in 1979 when my professor humiliated me in front of my class and called me this slur and made me feel like I don't belong. So these bias incidents can create such lasting harm. We also have what are called bias crimes or hate crimes under Oregon law. And these are crimes plus any evidence of bias motivation. So that slur plus a punch, that phrase, go back to your country, and then being spat at, damaging somebody's property, vandalism or threats, or certainly the crime of murder, plus any element of that bias motivation is considered a hate crime in Oregon. So I've listed some examples of bias incidents that are reported into the hotline, mimicking and mocking, saying we don't serve your kind here, being sent out of the store, repeatedly misgendering someone. So we have folks who, specifically say what my name is and what my pronouns are, and someone intentionally calls them by their dead name, the name that they don't affiliate with anymore, something that is part of their past but not who they are today. So those are some examples of bias incidents. Bias crimes are very specific conduct that include threats to a person, again, with that element of bias motivation. In Oregon, our Constitution has an even broader free speech allowance than the United States Constitution. So you learned in civics class back when you were young that, we have free speech, and that's part of our Constitution in the United States. And Oregon, under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, has an even broader definition of those freedoms of speech. So a criminal threat to an individual has to be specific, explicit, and imminent. So if somebody were to tell me from across the state, I'm going to kill you, you slur word, that is not a bias crime. It's specific, it's explicit. Maybe they say I have a gun and I'm going to do it, but it's not imminent. They're across the state from me. Now, does that leave a person in great fear? Absolutely. And yet under Oregon law, that's not a criminal threat. So it's a very high standard to get that threat to be criminal in Oregon. But if that threat is explicit and is imminent and is specific and targets a person or that person's property or that person's family, then that can be a bias crime in Oregon. Another definition of a bias crime is tampering with or damaging somebody's property. So that property need not belong to me, But if somebody is intentionally messing with my property, whether it's permanent damage or not, again, because of my protected class, that can be a bias crime. So an example is a person with a disability who has a specialized chair that they have to use for work. And if they go into work every day and their chair has been rolled across the warehouse because it's humiliating to the person to then have to walk, maybe with their visible disability, across that warehouse to go retrieve that chair. It's not their chair. It didn't damage their chair. And yet that could be a bias crime, again, depending on the motivation. Certainly hands-on offenses, including in Oregon, hands-on includes spitting, assaults, or any use of a weapon could be a bias crime. Oregon law says that bias motivation in part is sufficient to charge a bias crime. So if the bias motivation isn't the sole motivation, maybe someone, I'm driving down the street and I'm going pretty slow and it really angers the person behind me and they come up next to me and they're really irritated at, my slow driving. They roll down their window and they call me a slur and they spit at me or they bump their car into mine. Again, it all started because they were irritated that I was a slow driver. And then they saw me and they made some assumption about my perceived identity. And now we have a possible bias crime. So this case, State v. Hendricks, specifically say that if there's any biased conduct, then it can be sufficient to charge that bias crime. And that's a case that went up to the Oregon Supreme Court in the early 90s. So one of the big changes that Senate Bill 577 brought about was a requirement for law enforcement to refer victims of bias incidents to the statewide bias response hotline. So there's a Bureau of Justice Statistics survey from 2019 that says that about 3% of folks who experience bias ever tell anyone. They ever tell their spouse or their teacher or someone that they trust. Fewer than 3% of folks ever report that bias. And so if someone has a moment where they say, you know what, I'm going to call law enforcement, I'm going to report this, it's no longer sufficient for law enforcement to say, I'm so sorry, that's not okay. I'm sorry that happened to you, but that's civil. I can't do anything about it. That's free speech. I can't do anything about it. Now law enforcement is required to say, and I have a resource for you. Here's a number you can call for some support. Many times that civil speech is not criminal, right? The law enforcement officer gets that right, and yet there are civil rights ramifications. We may be talking about a civil rights violation. If a clerk at a store says, oh, we don't serve your kind here, that could be a civil rights violation. And although law enforcement isn't the entity that investigates that, there are options for next steps for that person if it's a violation of their civil rights. We've given a lot of tools for law enforcement to make these referrals. So we have a law enforcement toolkit that we have published on our website that includes a breakdown of those changes to the 17 laws that came about from Senate Bill 577. We have referral cards that law enforcement can hand out a card in the person's language, say, hey, this is a place that you can call for some support. We also have a QR code that, if we're not handing things out, that we can, someone can scan that QR code instead. We have information about what law enforcement can say to someone to make that person feel like, hey, you know what, this interaction was okay. I'm not being punished or made fun of, or I don't regret making this call to law enforcement. So even some specific language for police officers and sheriff's deputies to use, and certainly a whole host of other information, including information about federal crimes. So many times when a bias crime occurs, we're also talking about a federal hate crime. So generally, my dad used to say to me, don't make a federal case out of it, Johanna. And he meant, don't make such a big deal about it, because federal cases are a big deal. And so that's what we tell victims is that, hey, if we're getting federal law enforcement involved, it's usually a big deal. Is it illegal for somebody to steal my mail out of my mailbox? Yes. Is it a federal crime? Yes. But is the USPIS or FBI interested in when someone steals one piece of mail from me? No. But are they interested if me and 10,000 of my neighbors have my mail stolen? Yes. So generally, federal law enforcement is looking for those big. But cases where they have authority include cases involving guns and certain weapons manufactured outside of Oregon. So regularly, those gun cases are charged as a state crime, but it could be charged as a federal crime. If local law enforcement response is inadequate, they can be involved. If there's domestic terrorism involved, or if law enforcement perpetrates bias or uses excessive force, those are called color of law violations, the feds can be involved. Anytime that we have one of those specific, explicit, and imminent threats that occur on the internet or over the phone or through the mail, federal law enforcement can be involved. And we regularly will connect with them on these types of cases. If there are children targeted, if the crime occurs on federal property, like in the post office or an Indian country, or if that bias crime has to do with an interference with one of my federally protected rights, things like serving in court or access to housing or going to work or traveling on a roadway, all of those things, there are lots of opportunities for federal law enforcement to be involved. It varies. Generally, it's one of those quote unquote big deal cases. So we do have a statewide bias response hotline. The number is 1-844-924-BIAS, which is 2427. We have an online web portal where folks can report anytime at standagainsthate.oregon.gov. All of our advocates on the hotline are bi or multilingual. We accept all relay calls, and we have access to interpretation through a language line in over 240 languages. Like I mentioned, in many cases, even when there's not a crime, there are next step options available to folks, like civil rights remedies, sanctuary law remedies, civil protective orders that someone may be eligible for, address confidentiality programs, the possibility of breaking a lease without penalty. In Oregon, it is lawful for a landlord to evict a perpetrator of a bias crime or a bias incident, given 24 hours written notice, or certainly referring folks for a civil attorney who could help with a civil remedy through a lawsuit. One of the key resources that we offer on the hotline is, this is new, is that we have a small emergency fund to help folks recover in the aftermath of a bias crime or a bias incident. We have paid to buff out the N-word from somebody's car where it was etched on to the side of their vehicle. We've paid to repaint a fence where someone had spray painted a slur. We have helped folks move out of situations where a neighbor continues to harass based on protected class. We have covered pet boarding if someone needs to get out in an emergency, put their pet up, and then come back for that pet later. We've paid for a lot of security cameras through that emergency fund. Oftentimes bias is perpetrated by someone known to the individual. And so, but when we call law enforcement, proving that is very difficult. And so those security measures can be both for collecting evidence, but also for keeping someone safe. I mentioned that data is an important part of Senate Bill 577. So we have a public data dashboard on our website. Again, if you go to standagainsthate.oregon.gov, I think it's the second link down on the left is our data dashboard. And it allows folks to look by county, by protected class, by conduct, about what, by month, about what is being reported to the hotline. So we average about 200 reports per month to the hotline. We actually know that that's a very low undercount. The Oregon Criminal Justice Commission did a study in 2020 out of 2019 bias incidents and crimes. And that study said that 1.265 million bias crimes and bias incidents were perpetrated in Oregon in 2019. We weren't open, the hotline didn't open until 2020. So that's the closest year that we have for data. We had 1,101 reports reported to the hotline the following year. So we're a bit comparing apples to oranges there. But remember I said that fewer than 3% of biases reported by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Well, Oregon's reporting rate, given those apples and oranges figures, is 0.09% of biases reported. So we know we're only getting the tip of the iceberg. And so what we always say is that we all have a role to play. If you see bias, report it. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to give the perpetrator's name or the victim's name. You can report anonymously online. You can report anonymously on the hotline. Law enforcement has a responsibility to respond to, investigate, and if there's a crime, charge bias. And then, of course, tracking bias is now the obligation of the Civil Rights Unit as well as the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, so that that information is known about what is happening in our state. So we have a couple of social media handles if you want to follow us, but I would love to open the floor for any questions that folks may have.
I had one at the beginning. Are the statistics that you talk about in the Special Bill 577, are those current? I mean, when were those comprised?
The data dashboard statistics, so they're posted every month. So you can go on our website.
So they're current.
Yeah. And the law requires not just that hotline data to be tracked. Law enforcement, this is not a new law, but since the early 90s, law enforcement has been required to report to Oregon State Police any bias-motivated crimes. So not bias crimes, but bias-motivated crimes. So those are ongoing, reported to Oregon State Police. And now DA's offices are obligated to report their data to the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. So every year the CJC puts out this big robust report, hotline data and police data and DA's office data. And then they actually pull all of the data from the Oregon Judicial Department to see, well, what were the sentences? Who went to prison? Who went to jail? Who got probation? So it's this really robust report. That report comes out every year. But in the meantime, the hotline data is available every month.
Johanna, I have a question. We talked about it in our conversation. That is, could the city council access the information for the Vernonia zip code?
That's a great question. So the law requires that information that's reported to the hotline be confidential, so that a community member couldn't make a public records request and say, well, tell me everything about Mary and what she's reported or what she's perpetrated. The idea is for victims to have safe information or safe access to support, and that because we're not law enforcement and we're not out collecting evidence, that there's not information that can be released about perpetrators either. I think for the city of Vernonia, it would be a challenge to keep information confidential based on identity. So an example is if somebody was targeted with anti-Black and anti-American Indian bias, and there are only a handful of folks who identify as Black and American Indian within the community, would that out them? Again, on the other hand, that person may be targeted with that bias and not identify as such. So I think it's a difficult question. We have the Columbia County broad data. We have not yet provided individualized city data. We are in conversations with the city of Eugene to do so, and we'd have to write a specific administrative rule to do that. But it would be something that we would have to talk about and make sure that we could protect folks and keep those reports confidential.
That's a good point.
How about just a number without details as to which category we're in?
Sure.
We can get that?
Yes.
Oh, so we can get that
Just the number, but in
to the
terms
city
of,
level.
yeah.
So the number of reports.
Right. Because I think that was one of our key criteria when we had our meetings before, was to have some metric to measure, are we making an impact? Is it lessening, getting worse? I mean, how do you got to measure it somehow. And then
Sure.
I think this is a logical place to have people reporting, but we need to be able to see the number.
Right. Yeah, I think we could
So-
absolutely do a count.
Yeah.
But as we get sort of narrower into, was it a hate crime? Was it a bias incident? Was it race-based? Was it disability-based? We could potentially get into the identifying zone. But again, I'm not saying no to that either. I think that there could be a way to do that as well.
To address or kind of piggyback onto your statement, by the information we've been provided tonight, that 0.09% of bias incidents are even reported, I don't think even if we get that number, it's truly going to be indicative of what's going on in our community to be able to say, oh yeah, no, we have no problem because there haven't been any reports, or there's only been 2, or there's only been 4. Because that means that in reality, based on the numbers of data, we're looking at least 40 incidents. And I know that we like to think that we're a wonderful community, and for the most part, I think we are, but there is a significant issue still here. And I think it would be a mistake for us to believe that just because our number is low, that we don't have a problem.
I don't think we were really looking, it was try to keep it apples. The trouble at apples, the apples. Yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be a low number, but we want to know, is it increasing, decreasing? I think part of the group message is going to be, especially with this resource, to promote people to report. I mean, you can't fix a problem unless we can really see if there's a trend or go, and the education part of this. And so you have to have a metric to kind of know where you're at. I mean, I understand that, yeah, but we should do the extrapolation.
Oh, no.
Well, it is probably 40 and it's not.
Yeah.
4.
It's tough because only 3% statewide report it, is what she said.
Yeah,
And so,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, if the number of reports increases, then
Right.
it's actually the opposite. It means it's good. It means that people are reporting it.
Well, and that
The
could,
education piece is working.
yeah.
it could be, or it could be that you're having more instances. I mean, we're going to have to kind of weight it, but.
Yeah, I think the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission survey would be a better indicator of what is happening. They did a sociological survey polling Oregonians, whereas the hotline is if you choose to pick up the phone and make a phone call and report, you never know. You might have this horrific hate crime that's never reported, and it's not indicative of what's happening. It's just indicative of what's being reported. Whereas that CJC survey that came out in 2020 would be a better reflection. I don't know if they broke it down by town, but I can certainly send Stephanie a link, and it would be a way to take a look.
How often do they do that survey that they did in 2020?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that I would say, and don't quote me, but I saw another one about 10 years prior.
Okay.
So I don't know that it's not an annual thing. Yeah.
So I know that law enforcement has a mandate to provide the referral. I know that's at the state level, it's the legislative level. That to me seems incomplete. It really should be, here, I'm giving you this number. Can we make the call now? Or can I help you? I know that this is troublesome for you, but I just don't, I feel like when they're in that moment, that's the moment when you need to capture that and be able to encourage them. And the other thing I'd like to say is your point about education. It's so key. I have younger children. I have a 25-year-old, 6-year-old. Okay, wait, something like that. And who does identify as queer, whose partner is trans, whose partner's brother is trans. And I have been given a huge education on this. My brother-in-law is gay and has been since high school, and that tells you how long ago that was. So we've always been aware of the issues and the challenges of the queer community, the LGBTQ. AI plus, this was a new version of that I.
That was just sexual orientation, but certainly the larger queer community, LGBTQIA2S+.
Yes. Yeah, we get used to that. It's hard, and we, husband and I, are trying very hard and have gotten great information. And it's great having a child who is very pragmatic about it and is willing to talk about anything to do with it in a very factual, and has done a lot of research. She's working for a community action program in Salem with homeless kids and kids who are at risk. And it's the more I learn, the easier it is to talk about it, the easier it is to recognize it, the easier it is for me to be able to assist somebody who is challenged by something, whether they've seen something, they don't know what to do, or they're uncomfortable about it. How do we, what should I do? And that's huge. And just talking about it more, making it more known, and making it more comfortable for people. You don't have to like things. There are a lot of things I don't like, but doesn't mean I should not be accepting. And the more you hear it, the more it becomes a non-issue in being able to discuss it. And I could talk forever, so I'll just stop now. I think I made my point.
Thank you, Counselor. And I think your point to, the education is huge. We've had many really wonderful conversations with folks on the hotline, from folks who call in perpetrating bias, and the willingness to learn for some is really there. And it can be just a really wonderful moment of providing some education and what harm that perpetrates, and why it hurts, and why we choose certain language. So I think the point to education, especially younger folks, they innately understand pronouns, and innately understand I am who I am, and I'm not making choices about things. So certainly we have opportunity with the education piece. And then to your point about the gap, we have lots of law enforcement agencies in the state who say, you know what, that mandate to refer you is not sufficient. I'm additionally going to follow my agency policy and make a report. And we have a separate reporting portal for law enforcement. So they don't have to call the hotline. They don't have to talk to an advocate. They can fill out 7 quick questions on our law enforcement portal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they've made a report, and we don't have that gap. Just in case Mary decides not to pick up that phone and call us, we don't lose that data. And if Mary does, then we make sure that the data isn't being double counted. So
and again, it's not our job to figure out the details of that, but it would make more sense or some sense for the second question or the second statement to be, here's the referral. Would you like me to do this for you? Because a lot of people are not comfortable even picking up a phone or even doing that online because they are concerned it's not going to be anonymous.
yeah.
Do you have examples of that policy?
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, we have about, I would say, 40 law enforcement agencies in Oregon where it's a policy for them to make that report.
It's interesting. I don't see as much, actually, maybe I just don't see a lot of it because I'm not around that much because I work out of town. But I don't see a lot of overt discrimination or bias. I'm also Jewish. Husband's not, but I am. So the kids are. And so it's really interesting. I have kept that quiet at times because I was not sure how that would be taken. And it's kind of sad in this day and age that as a adult my age that I should be concerned about saying, this is my religious, it's just, it's strange, but it does follow along this. Nothing's particularly happened, but it's just sometimes in situations you're just not comfortable with that.
You can read that situation and you have the resilience and the skill sometimes is what it is to read that room and know, am I safe here? Am I not safe here?
So I think when we were having our group discussions, we knew we had the police reporting part of the component, but the fear was a lot of people weren't going to go to that step. And that's why once we heard about this portal, we were like, there's where we can get more data to see for Vernonia if we're, so that then I know one time we were talking about trying to track, like having complaints come across through the office, but I think that's a bad idea.
This is a better resource.
Yeah, that's why we jumped in, because it's just some of the concerns you brought up about confidentiality and things like that. And again, hesitancy for people. So now can a witness, they can call?
Yes.
I didn't know if I saw that or not.
Yeah, that was on here. That had been my question. And then it was really nice that anybody can report.
Yeah. So again, the group effort here is community education. People are seeing this.
924 bias.
Yeah. No, I was looking for the illustration of that.
I can't remember, excuse me. I can't remember, when did we form the 10-member committee? Was it about 3 years ago?
It was 2019.
You were on the council, you were part of
was.
it. And Dale,
Years ago.
Stephanie, Josette,
About a year into
Steve
our
Connor,
term there.
and then 5 other citizens. So.
Yeah, it was just
Scott might know.
It was after the Black Lives Matter things happened, and that was
Floyd.
2019, I believe. And then it kind of led to the formation of the group.
Yeah.
And then the formation of the city committee.
Yeah.
And the rest.
I really,
all the cities were doing the
I thought that was a really good application and a good formation, not only the city council being part of it, but the community coming together. And you guys met several times, and Chief Connor was at your meetings. And so, and here we are again tonight. I want to thank you for being a part of that.
Well, it was eye-opening too. I mean,
Yeah.
and we had some examples given that you're like, wow. One of our former counselors, he had kind of a unique perspective of how to deal with it. He said, just give me the name. We'll just go take care of
Oh, gee.
Yeah, just what, Dale?
it. Probably wouldn't be the most legal way of dealing with
We'll
it.
just go take care of it.
Oh, just take care of it.
That's how you used to.
But
The
yeah,
question I'm left with here is, we've learned things that there are resources and the like. How do we disseminate this to the community?
That's a great question. So this year we are embarking on an outreach campaign called You Belong, period. And that will involve radio spots. We do have a PSA that actually is still airing, but additional PSAs. We have posters, we have brochures. We would love to come table at any community events that you have. So any,
Like the Salmon Festival or something.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Jamboree.
Yes.
Very definitely. would
Yeah.
go fine.
So we can come and do presentations to community groups, but we also love just being amongst community members. And so if you let us know, we would be happy to be there. And if you have any suggestions about how we disseminate information.
Well, our editor for our local newspaper is here.
yeah.
That's
We will write it.
Johanna, do you have any of that that's kind of print media ready?
Yes, I have it in my trunk.
Okay.
In your trunk. Huh?
Great. I'll chat with you afterwards. Maybe.
Great. And we have a lot on our website as well. So one of our links, if you go to standagainst.hate.oregon.gov, one of our links is called like assets and other materials, and it has all of our print flyers in multiple languages, our brochures, our posters, our PSA. So.
Yeah, the education part of this is just so huge, and it's really generational. I mean, I know when we were going through the resolution process here and my parents didn't understand that at all. They just were, why are you doing this? And I was like, really, Mom? I had to really have a talk with her, and they had people of color that they were in high school together, and they thought well of them. So it was like, I don't understand why they didn't understand that there could be discrimination or, the bias could exist though in the community. And it was really surprising that, and they were just like, why are you doing that? It doesn't make, well, would you not want to treat everybody the same? I mean, and it wasn't that they were saying that. It was just that I think sometimes you just don't believe it's happening in your community. I mean,
If you don't have a close friend or relative who is a member of the protected class, you don't have big access to their experience, right?
Right.
yeah,
And I mean,
yeah,
how would you know otherwise?
yeah,
I can tell you that, I grew up and my entire high school was white, I'm 66. And then later on, we got 2 black kids in our school. Nobody ever thought anything of it. Maybe there were some people that, were aggressive towards them and I didn't know about it. But now that I have black grandchildren and great-grandchildren, I've learned a lot.
yeah.
And I've seen a lot more because you don't see it when you're not part of the protected class. Yeah, so.
Johanna, you were very willing to come out here and make your presentation and said come back to community groups and do that. Do you ever do presentations in schools?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do. We have been invited every year since our existence, now 3 years, to present at the Classroom Law Project. They have 2 conferences a year, one that students go to and one that teachers go to bring the information back. We do, and we would love to do presentations to schools. We've done a lot of virtual events. I think that's one of the things that I was talking to Stephanie about. The pandemic sort of brought about, I can pop into 5 classrooms in a day instead of just, drive all the way for one. So yes, we do and can do school presentations. There are also a lot of really great curriculum out there that are intended to sort of be woven into what is being taught already required. The Anti-Defamation League has a great Stand Against Hate curriculum for elementary, middle, and high schools. There's a really great, as sort of a one-time education bias intervention model through a program called Right to Be. And they do a number of just 30-minute, you pop in and you can take this, like, how do I intervene if I'm seeing something happen that keeps everyone safe, that keeps myself safe, that doesn't make further harm or humiliate the person who is targeted. So there are a lot of great online options as well. But yes, we do school presentations.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. So everything you talked about was considered woke, the phrase woke, that's gaining popularity. And woke means, well, I want you to tell me also, so I don't miss anything. Racial, being aware of racial bias, crimes, and against LGBTQ bias. But how does it all fit in? Because it's gaining so much popularity, this word, that if you are aware of crime or bias, then you are going to be a target. You'll be called woke, which is now being
It's a slur almost.
Yeah.
It's getting to that point, it's reaching that point.
Yeah. So how do you talk to people on the hotline? Do they tell you, oh, somebody called me woke and I can't get away from, being pointed at, and I'm trying to do the right thing, but yet I'm woke. How does it all fit in, and can it be fit in to counteract education,
Yeah.
people talking instead of, we're here, we're not coming together, and you know what happens? I hate you. No, I hate you. No. So.
Yeah, I think, we do receive reports from allies for folks who are pushing equity initiatives. So we're not treating folks the same. We're recognizing that different folks have different needs, and we may need to boost up our response here and maybe boost up our response a little bit here. And so we do receive reports from folks who are targeted for pushing equity as the new norm. And we do provide support for those folks, particularly elected officials, particularly female elected officials, particularly LGBTQ elected officials, and particularly elected officials who are people of color often bear the brunt of that. But we have dominant culture, cisgender, heterosexual, white folks who call the hotline and don't identify as a minority in any of the protected classes and are receiving a lot of hate for what they are in how they're trying to make their communities better. And it is, it's scary. You know, folks are doxxed. They are, their private information is published online, their name, in schools, their home address, their, and, you know, put on YouTube, and then they're getting thousands of, you know, hate emails or phone calls. We had one person, and this is, you know, information that's hit the news, where their information was released on a national news channel and published and continues to live on in perpetuity online. So I think, I don't know that I have a solution. You know, I think that there are folks who are seeing the righteousness in being that ally and you know, making sure that they do what is important to them and either standing up or, you know, pursuing a particular initiative. And unfortunately, that has come with consequence sometimes.
Do you think, or would it be, would you be able to add woke as one of the rules?
You know, I will tell you that we have, we have equity, supporting equity as one of our, we list the 7 protected classes on our data dashboard. And then we have a section for non-protected classes because people can be protected for a class that's not protected under this statute. So for example, gender is not a protected class under this statute. So the fact that I'm a female, cisgender female, but female is not protected, but we track when someone is targeted because of that gender or because of their housing status or because of pursuing equity. So we do have that. I don't have woke as one of the non-protected classes, but I think certainly if someone is reporting to the hotline that is the slur that is used against them for some of those things that we've described, we do track those reports, even if it doesn't fall within one of the 7 protected classes.
Do you have any ideas of how to counteract the whole movement?
I wish it were that simple. I would say that, again, that program Right to Be is a really great starting place.
Excellent. I think I simply got Right to Be.
Yeah.
I'll send it.
But I don't have a solve or a fix for that. I think that we have a lot of coming together and community building to work on that.
And we're at an advantage because we're a small community.
Yeah.
And we lived in Portland, it'd be a much bigger ask.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that school administrators aren't part of the required reporting.
Yeah, so they are not. However, there are a couple of pieces of legislation that have come about since Senate Bill 577, including every school is required to have an Every Student Belongs coordinator. It was called an All Student Belongs coordinator at first, I think, but it's now called Every Student Belongs. And in fact, the legislature banned, although I told you about how permissive Oregon's free speech section was of our Oregon Constitution, the legislature has banned 3 symbols that typically would be considered free speech in another environment, but in a school and learning environment, it interferes with students' education. So the swastika, the Confederate flag, and the noose are all banned symbols in a school environment. And in every student, so this law requires that every school has an Every Student Belongs coordinator and has a bias response protocol. So if someone does report what they're to do, how they're to document it, Safe Oregon has that tip line, receives a lot of reports. And right now we're trying to, that is, I believe, run out of Arkansas. So when you call Safe Oregon or you text them, you're talking to someone a couple of time zones away. And we're trying to ensure that that data is incorporated in the data for Oregon.
So that's banned from everywhere except for history books.
Correct. If it's used in as a learning tool, like this is a symbol that was used to, symbolize Nazis, then yes, correct.
Maybe a school could have a policy of reporting.
I'm also on the school board, so hence thanks, Dan. I did write it down. I will check with Mr. Hellman about that.
I mean, we could be proactive.
Oh, I agree. And he is very much that way.
Yeah. That's right there, and we're talking about education. Right there's one of the key spots. They have a lot of exposure there, and probably, I don't know what the mix is in schools, but with the see, and I'm not proficient on all these things, so that's one of my problems is trying not to stick my foot in my mouth and talking to people and not having them take offense, but
Generally, they won't take offense, but they will correct you.
yeah, they'll correct me. But the younger population being more prone.
They're the most diverse
So that would be,
by far.
Yeah, school population is the most diverse.
yeah, well, there you go. There you go. There's the PC.
Don't point at me, point at Stephanie. She came up with the right word.
The most, for sure.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the city or anywhere in
Yeah.
the United States, that's where you're going to see the most is in a school.
That's where you're going to reach the most people.
Right, and they are proactive at it. They've got the hygiene kits are now in all the bathrooms. That was mandated, but we were very proactive about that. It's also causing a lot of headaches for our maintenance people.
I've heard.
Because students can be a little immature and childish, which, they're just, I don't condone it, but kids are kids. But they're working on that. And they are going to be doing some outreach to the kids and education. It's like, just accept it. It's there. Just deal with it. So.
In time.
They will. They'll get there. I mean, they were destroying the bathrooms anyway, so this just gave them one more tool to do so. I don't understand that part of it.
And it's an example of why are you doing this? Because, this was put here for a reason. And why are you doing this? It's almost a bias crime in itself. Because you're affecting the person that may need that.
No, I don't disagree with you on that. I appreciate your coming. Thank you.
I myself, as an elected official, take very seriously the oath that I took in January to uphold the Constitution, not only in the state of Oregon, but the United States. So, plus I try to live by the golden rule, so that pretty much takes care of how I treat people, expect to be treated.
I appreciate your all being here and your being here and all of you participating in this conversation because I know it's not easy.
No.
But it's getting easier the more it's brought up, the more it's talked about.
Especially in today's environment, we're so divided as a nation. And like Dale's parents and my parents, the old generation, I'm in my 70s too, and But things are a little different today. And at least we have help where we can look for it and get it. And both my son-in-laws are in law enforcement, are officers, and one in Portland, one in Beaverton, and so they still have the qualified immunity, but man, they go to work every day with one hand tied behind their back. It's really hard. And with the riots 2 years ago in Portland, for them to just stand there and take what they took, it's just a big problem. But I'm glad everyone's here facing it tonight, so it's a good thing.
We appreciate you coming.
Very much so.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Are you going to get together anymore as a group or keep going?
Well, we have a mailing list, and Corey's she used to be the one that kind of got people going.
Yeah.
I'm busy right now.
Yeah.
So she asked me to kind of keep things moving. So
Okay.
anybody wants to be on the mailing list, let me know. And hopefully it doesn't go into your spam box, but we're trying to make some things happen.
Good.
I think some interesting ideas may come out of this evening's conversation, because there's a couple action items that we could at least discuss.
Yeah.
So there's some possibilities that might get us moving again on some things. Talking to me.
I'm just trying to bring in some speakers. We were giving the librarian a little break.
Yeah.
She needed to get oriented, but I think we're going to have some speakers.
Just like everything, COVID sort of made it difficult.
Yes.
To
Yeah.
be active and doing things in the community. And
Yeah.
one of the things we really wanted to do, I think at the beginning, was talk about having speakers and trying to work with the school, and that sort of all just got put on hold for a while.
Yeah.
Every time you think it might be time to start up again, a new variant comes along, and then we shouldn't all be getting together. I think we're getting ready to start back up too. Some things.
Good. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
So again, drilling down to Vernonia's data, is that going to be available online, or is we going to have to get a hold of someone, or?
It will not be online, so I can send whomever an email and get you a count. And I think you were
I think
asking
that's
for the
an
law
annual
enforcement
thing.
policy.
Probably be doing, pulling the police end of it, pulling this reporting, just to give us an idea, and then knowing that we're missing a whole lot of it. And going off of that.
If you'd like our group to be the contact with Johanna, we can do that.
Yeah, and
Put it in my calendar.
I don't think it matters who it is, as long as, I think,
I was gonna have her send me the policy, so if you just want to send me all of it, and then I can forward it to everyone.
Oh, sure.
And then obviously you can still reach out to her.
Yeah, no, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember our agreement, because it seemed like there was, I can't remember if that was the city's obligation to do the tracking on the data.
But we do have our formal statements that we've made. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to have that brought to us annually.
You had asked Verge to come up with a system, and that was.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about coming up with a way of tracking, but I can see the pitfalls in having anything coming across. It's not going to work as well as this is. And this is where the education part we need to promote.
And at the
Using
time,
the hotline.
discussing if they weren't up and running yet, so.
Yes. Now, as soon as she gave her spiel last time, we're all like, yes, that's what we need. Yeah. So thank you.
And drive safely.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, watch for deer.
Yes.
Back to Portland?
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's true, this time of night you'll have the elk on that side.
yeah. Elk this way. Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
I'll
thank you so much.
thank you once again and hope to see you again sometime. So
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
I'll adjourn the meeting at 7:45. Meeting adjourned.